It's a great honor to introduce today's first speaker, Dr. Tsao. He's a senior scientist in Materials, Physical, and Chemical Sciences Center at Sandia National Laboratory. And his interests in research and research management have included laser microchemistry, semiconductor epitaxy, solid-state lighting, energy economics, and meta-research. And he is the author of Materials Fundamentals of Molecular Beam Epitaxy and is a co-author with Professor Venki Narayana at Harvard University, titled The Genesis of Technoscientific Revolutions, Rethinking the Nature and Nurture of Research. He received his PhD in Applied Physics from Harvard University under Professors Eli Yablonovich and Nico Bloembergen and Itamar Barak. And he received his master's in electrical engineering and bachelor's in mathematics from Stanford University. Please join me in warmly welcoming Dr. Jeff Tsao.
Yeah, thank you, Helen. Thank you, Professor Kim and Dr. Rowe and the University of Science and Technology. Let's see, so Helen, I should share my screen now, I guess.
Yes, please, you can share your screen. Yeah, you can override the screen share we made.
Okay.
Yeah, we can see your screen.
Okay, yeah. Very good. Yeah, and thank you for this opportunity. Let's see, as Helen knows, I was a bit hesitant to take this opportunity. Giving others, especially the next generation, lessons is in my mind full of danger. Times are so different. How could someone who lived his career in a previous era give relevant lessons to those just now beginning their careers in a completely different era? And people, of course, are so different. Even if times weren't different, how could one individual so unique hope to give relevant lessons to other individuals, themselves unique, but in completely different ways? So I thought I would rephrase this talk as lessons from an older to a younger me. That way, you won't think that I expect my lessons to generalize to you, but still maybe you'll find something of value from lessons that I might give myself. Plus, there is the saying, with at least some truth to it, I think, the more things change, the more they stay the same. So I divided my talk into two parts. Part A is a backwards look at my life, both family and work, so you can get a feel for my perspective. And then part B is 4 lessons, not meant to be comprehensive in any way, but drawn from that backwards look. I'll start with one that I didn't do such a good job at, one that I might give myself a C grade on, and that is accept yourself. Then I'll discuss one I did maybe an okay job at that I might give myself a B grade on, integrate family and work. Then I'll discuss 2 that maybe I did do an okay job at, seek mentor partners, and then manage expectations around creativity. Okay, so let me start with a backwards look at family. I start with family because, at least in my perspective, family is what counts most in life. It represents our deepest values, our deepest bonds, the deepest part of our humanity. I will talk a bit later about a close colleague, Venki Narayana. I think, Roy, you know Venki very well. But he and I often say, we are humans first, intellect second. Non-scientists and non-engineers might sometimes think, oh, you're a scientist or an engineer. Maybe you're some sort of robot who just solves equations. Nothing could be further from the truth. Even Albert Einstein was deeply human. Even Steve Jobs was deeply human. On my own family, you can probably tell from my family name that I'm of Chinese origin. And from the spelling of my family name, some of you might guess that my parents were in the generation that migrated out of China before the Pinyin alphabet was introduced. So before the end of the Chinese Civil War. And from my accent, some of you might also guess that it was the US that my parents migrated to and where I grew up. But even though I grew up in the US, I do feel a strong tie to Chinese culture as well as to the larger Asian culture. I'll talk more about this later, but in the tension between the more Western values of individual freedom and independence versus the more Eastern values of contribution and obligation to one's larger society, I do lean towards the latter. And that's exemplified by these words on the left from my grandfather on my mom's side. They were written in 1937, when, as then mayor of Nanking, he was fully expecting to die as Japanese troops were about to take over his city. The font is probably too small for you to read, so I'll read the words out. As a disciple and follower of Sun Yat-sen, I have been part of the revolution for 34 years. My family, as well as personal life, became secondary. All this time, my wife has been the one shouldering the burdens and responsibilities of my family. Now I urge her to carry on, and I hope my children will grow up and continue my sacred duty for the country and the people. I would rather die defending the country than to live as a slave under occupation. There is nothing to me more uplifting than contributing like this to a higher cause. And my dad certainly reinforced that in me. He would often say that music, which I had actually hoped when I was younger to make my profession, is something that you can do for your own personal enjoyment, but science and engineering are cumulative and is where you can make a lasting contribution to society. I remember getting into lots of debates with friends when I was young, my friends urging me to do what I love, with me sometimes being swayed into thinking that's got to be right, but deep down resisting in favor of doing what I thought would contribute the most. My wife and I married young while we were both still in grad school. This is my wife, Sylvia, the day she got her PhD at Harvard in material science. After she graduated, we were both lucky to find jobs at Sandia National Labs. So both began our careers there. And soon after we started, we had our first baby, a boy. Life is not always linear, though. When our baby boy was almost 2, he and Sylvia were on a plane, United Airlines Flight 232. That plane crashed in Sioux City, Iowa, and 112 out of the 296 passengers died. Sylvia miraculously survived, but our son did not. As you can imagine, many things changed for us. Sylvia did continue at Sandia Labs for a little while longer, but we were fortunate to have 2 more children, 2 more sons, and Sylvia subsequently decided to retire early and devote herself to our family. Certainly, this was an important lesson for us, to follow one's heart. If family pulls you away from work, then pull away. There are many ways to live a fulfilling life. Indeed, probably no family doesn't encounter surprises, some major in life. If one is lucky, one's family survives the surprise and finds new ways to live a fulfilling life. But definitely not all families are so lucky. Okay, let me now turn to a backwards look at work. My first 30 years was, of course, a preparation phase, just like the phase you are all in now. Outside of school, I loved piano, reading, and tennis. In fact, I loved piano so much that, as I just mentioned, I entertained the idea that it might be my profession. And I even began undergraduate school at Stanford as a music major. I also loved psychology and understanding how people think and feel. In high school, I subscribed to psychology today. And I took, as an undergraduate, took psychology, computation, and artificial intelligence classes. Even back then, as primitive as AI was, I thought understanding how computers think could maybe help us understand how people think. But I wasn't sure about the future of those fields, and I was even less sure that I could really contribute. So I ended up with math and EE degrees from Stanford, as Helen mentioned, then an applied physics PhD with emphasis on laser spectroscopy from Harvard. If I could sum up these 30 years, it was just being interested in everything, learning and exploring as widely as I could, so that I could better understand what my wife Sylvia was studying. I even took material science classes, which turned out to be surprisingly important in my subsequent career. My first 15 years of professional life was mostly at Sandia Labs in research, so I had a fair amount of freedom. I started out combining my backgrounds in lasers and materials, studying ultra-fast melting and solidification of silicon using nanosecond laser pulses. I'll mention him again later, but I remember telling Tom Picrow, my manager at the time, that I'd really like to study crystal growth at the opposite, ultra-slow end of the speed scale, using a then emerging technique, molecular beam epitaxy. Immediately, he said, yes, that's something we should be doing. And he got to work figuring out a way for us to do that together. So a minor lesson from this might be, don't be afraid to express to your institution or your managers a passion for something. Even if your institution or managers have constraints, which they typically will, the more they know about your passions, the more they'll be able to align them with your company's interests. I ended up writing a book on molecular beam epitaxy, which then led to opportunities to spend sabbaticals at other institutions. One was the Institute of Materials Research and Engineering in Singapore to teach. And another was E2O Communications, a startup company in Los Angeles, to lead their R&D effort exploring novel lasers for fiber optic communications. As some of you know, during those years, the 1990s, remarkable breakthroughs in gallium nitride semiconductor materials and devices were taking place, including the discovery of the Candela class blue LED that later won the 2014 Nobel Prize in Physics. I'll talk more about him later, but I had the privilege of working with Roland Heitz, then group manager of HP's Semiconductor Products Group, to write a white paper on the opportunities and challenges associated with bringing those LEDs to the point of being able to impact general illumination. On the face of it, this was laughable, given how primitive blue LEDs still were and how mature existing general illumination technology, incandescent and fluorescent lamps were. But we had a vision, so I came back to Sandia to work on that vision. That turned out to be the next 15 years of my career, both at Sandia and also working closely with US Department of Energy program offices. Of course, we know in hindsight the tremendous impact solid-state lighting ended up having. When it's all said and done, it will have decreased world primary energy consumption on the order of 3 to 4%. It was really a privilege to be able to contribute to solid-state lighting during its formative years. Okay, by this time, my career had spanned a pretty wide range of experiences, my own research as well as program and line management of others' research. I had gradually become concerned about the health of research in the larger national and international R&D ecosystem, especially research at the extreme of knowledge exploration. So I began diving more deeply into meta research, research about research. I'll talk more about him later, but with Venki Narayanamurthy, I published a book in late 2021 that I'm very excited about, The Genesis of Technoscientific Revolutions, Rethinking the Nature and Nurture of Research. In a way, this book connects back to my early interest in psychology and how people think and feel. It also connects back to my early interest in artificial intelligence. Can an understanding of how human intelligences do research inform how artificial intelligences might do the equivalent of research? I just turned 68, so don't know how much longer I can go, but perhaps I have another 7 years or so, and that would make 15 years in this new area of meta research. Okay, so that's it for the backwards look. Let me now turn to like 4 lessons, again, not comprehensive in any way, from an older me to like a younger me. I'll start with the 2 lessons that I don't give myself such a high grade on. Then I'll end with the lessons I did a little bit better at. My lesson 1, which I give myself a C grade on, is accept yourself. In fact, I spent a big chunk of my life not understanding these 2 bullets in red. The first bullet summarizes a quote from William James, the 19th century American philosopher and psychologist, who said, in most of us, by the age of 30, the character has set like plaster and will never soften again. In other words, by age 30, we are basically who we are. I used to think the opposite, that I was infinitely plastic and could be whatever I wanted to be. It's only more recently that I realized, no, I really was who I was going to be by age 30. And from that first bullet follows this second bullet: focus on your strengths, not on your weaknesses. You can and should compensate for your weaknesses, but they will likely forever be your weaknesses. Instead, you should focus on your strengths, because these are what will help you make your unique contributions. If Albert Einstein had tried to be an engineering entrepreneur, he would likely not have succeeded. If Steve Jobs had tried to discover new theories of space-time, he would also likely not have succeeded. In my case, the way in which I really didn't understand myself, and certainly didn't accept myself until more recently, was articulated by E.O. Wilson, the evolutionary biologist. Some of you may have read E.O. Wilson's work. I'm a big fan of his. In his book, The Meaning of Human Existence, he describes the ultimate paradox of the human species. Again, the font is too small for you to read, but because he puts it so beautifully, let me read from his book this quote. Probably at this point during the Habeline period, a conflict ensued between individual level selection, with individuals competing with other individuals in the same group on the one side, and group level selection, with competition between groups on the other. The competition between the 2 forces can be succinctly expressed as follows: within groups, selfish individuals beat altruistic individuals, but groups of altruists beat groups of selfish individuals. So it came to pass that humans are forever conflicted by the 2 extreme forces that created us. The eternal conflict is not God's test of humanity. It is not a machination of Satan. It is just the way things worked out. The conflict might be the only way in the entire universe that human level intelligence and social organization can evolve. We will find a way eventually to live with our inborn turmoil and perhaps find pleasure in viewing it as the primary source of our creativity. In other words, co-opetition. Competition and cooperation are both important to human society. There is no more virtue or vice in being more on the competitive side so as to achieve the best you can achieve, or in being more on the cooperative side so as to achieve the best benefit for your society. No one is totally one or the other, and everyone has a different balance point. Mine happens to be more on the cooperative side than on the competitive side. I really don't enjoy competition and have through most of my life wondered what was wrong with me. It was not until one of my close friends, Tom Brennan, now a venture capitalist and himself a highly competitive person, told me that I should just stop trying to force myself to be more competitive. I should just be myself, that it hit home that it was okay to just be myself. And because it is public, not private goods that I've always been drawn to create, it is why Sandia Labs as a national lab has always felt like a more comfortable home for me. People have often asked me why I don't move to academia or industry. Academic research, not always, but as many of you know, can be a very cutthroat, competitive environment, which wasn't for me. And the business world also wasn't for me. At Sandia Labs, I'm surrounded by what I think of as unsung heroes, people who every day do their jobs for what they believe is the public good. And there's something comfortable and inspiring to me about that. Again, that doesn't mean that folks who create private goods aren't also super important for society. Society needs both the private and the public. Society needs both competition and cooperation. I don't have time to discuss this in more detail, but it's possible, as E.O. Wilson presciently alludes to in the last sentence of the quote in blue, that it is key to how societies of human intelligences are creative, and maybe key to how societies of artificial intelligences might also be creative. Okay, let's turn now to my lesson 2, integrate family and work, which I kind of give myself a B grade on. I don't know, my wife might give me a C grade on that. It's more popular to call this life and work, and even to reverse the order so that it is work and life. But on purpose, I replace life with family and put family in front, because to me, family is life and also comes first. Pretty much every other part of my life, all my non-family hobbies, I gave up after our children came. Now that our children have left home, I'm picking back up my piano, my tennis, even some reading. But while they were home, I didn't see much need for hobbies. Once I was at the Los Angeles airport after a business trip with a colleague of mine, Jung Han, now chair of the EE department at Yale. There had been some free time during the trip, so I asked him whether he had had time to go and enjoy Disneyland. He said no, that for him, having fun without family didn't seem to count as fun. When I heard that, I thought, wow, that's exactly how I feel. And now I sort of have permission to be like that. Of course, this isn't for everyone, and of course there are limits, but it has worked for me. Also, often people use the word balance rather than the word integration. So balance to me is when you divide your day into work hours and family hours, and you don't let these cross over into each other. That's never worked for me. Research is to me about being creative, thinking about new ideas, and no one knows when these will come. If they come during nominal work hours, that's of course fantastic, but they don't always come then. Often they come during nominal family hours. Likewise, family is full of unexpected but important events, and one never knows when these will come. A colleague of mine, Bill Brayland, now retired from Sandia, once told me, there is no such thing as quality time, where by quality time, one means wonderful time with family that one can schedule from, say, 6 p.m. to 9 p.m. Every evening. There's only time. And sometimes it will be a good time, and sometimes it will be a bad time. But one needs to be there, whether it's a good time or a bad time. That's what makes a family a family. So I've always been a proponent of family work integration, not balance. You do whatever it is that you should do whenever it makes sense to do it, regardless of whether it is for family or for work. Here I am, for example, right after our second son, Emil, was born, working and, well, trying to work and babysit at the same time. And I've been extremely lucky. I had a supportive spouse who planned many family activities around my work and who accommodated my work through many of those family activities. On my sabbatical in Singapore, we all moved there so that we could make it both an adventure for the family as well as a work adventure for me. And this applied to extended family as well. When I went to conferences, I would often arrange for family, especially my mom, to tag along with me. In this photo, my mom was at a lighting conference with me, even at an age when she needed to be strolled in a wheelchair by her caregiver. And I found that in almost any city I was in for business, I could often fit in a visit to family and friends. I found it amazing how meaningful such visits can be, even if they are only for an hour or two. All that said, I do only give myself a B grade, and that's because of the times I didn't integrate family and work. For example, during my sabbatical at E2O, it turned out to be convenient for family, turned out not to be convenient for family to come with me to Los Angeles. So as exciting a work opportunity as that was, I should just not have taken that opportunity. Even though I flew back to Albuquerque every weekend for 9 months, I was gone during the week. And like I said earlier, it's not possible to plan for quality time on cue. You have to be there physically for the good times and the bads. Okay, so now let's turn to 2 lessons that maybe I give myself a better grade on. Okay, so here's my lesson 3, seek mentor partners. Some might call this seek mentors, and certainly that's part of it. To me, seeking mentors means seeking people you admire, seeking people from whom you can learn. And throughout my life and career, absolutely, I benefited from mentors, people I admired and from whom I learned. I show photos on the left of 3 people I consider mentors who changed my life, who changed the way I think about the world. Rickson's son at the leftmost left was my freshman roommate in undergraduate school at Stanford. He might be the most creative person I have ever met. He ended up being chief technologist for IDEO, the famous Silicon Valley design firm. He taught me that creativity was everywhere to be found. It can be found in surprising solutions to problems that people come to you with. But most importantly, it can be found in surprising new problems that people don't even know they have, but that once articulated and solved can change the world. Eli Yablonovich at the middle left was my PhD thesis advisor at Harvard, the father of photonic crystals, and on many people's short list of possible Nobel Prize winners. He taught me to question everything. You should not be afraid of questioning and rethinking from first principles what others have taken for granted but may not be true. Tom Pickrow at the rightmost left was my first manager at Sandia Labs, who, as I had mentioned, enabled me to switch to the then emerging field of molecular beam epitaxy. He taught me that ideas are cheap, or at least that all by themselves they are cheap. I remember once we were in a group meeting talking about a recent advance from another group. One of my colleagues said, "Oh gosh, that's not such a great advance. I had that idea ages ago." Tom said immediately, "Sure, you may have had that idea, but they're the ones who followed through with the idea. 1,000 things could have gotten in their way, but they're the ones who followed it through, and they deserve plenty of credit." Still, these are folks who changed my life, but I don't think I changed theirs. It's the 2 folks on the right that I want to say a bit more about, because I didn't just benefit from them, but I think and hope that I also provided some benefit to them. That's what I mean by seek mentor partners and not just mentors. Here at the leftmost right is Roland Heitz, group manager of the semiconductor products group at HP at a time when HP was the optoelectronics giant of the world. I had mentioned him earlier. It was he who had the vision that semiconductors could someday transform general illumination. In part, I went along for the ride, but also in part, I was able to help him quantify the global scale energy economics impact that was necessary to create a vision for solid state lighting. Along the way, one of the things he taught me was that you need to be careful. You need to dot your I's and cross your T's. Otherwise, how can you even convince yourself, much less others, that you know what you're talking about? But once you have convinced yourself, be bold. Don't be afraid if the world disagrees. It is precisely when you believe you're right, but the world disagrees, that you have a chance to really contribute to the world. Further to the right is Venki Narayanamurthy, former director of the Solid State Electronics Lab at Bell Labs and founding dean of the School of Engineering and Applied Science at Harvard. It is he who has an instinctive understanding of the nature of research and how it can be best nurtured. Again, in part, I went along for the ride, but also in part, I was able to add the reductionist thinking that could, together with his integrative thinking, enable a more confident and comprehensive rethinking of the nature and nurture of research. Along the way, he taught me that in this day and age of science-based this and science-based that, it is easy to think, oh, we just have to apply scientific principles and we'll solve whatever problem we have before us. In fact, scientific principles are often wrong, or at least incomplete. And it takes imagination and daring to go beyond the science that might be wrong or incomplete. It's very much like the Mark Twain quote, "It ain't what you don't know that gets you into trouble. It's what you know for sure that just ain't so." I love that quote, even though actually it turns out Mark Twain might not have written that quote, but it's commonly attributed to him. Okay, let me close with my lesson 4, manage expectations around creativity. This lesson I could spend a lot of time on because it is a big part of my most recent work on meta research. And here, with apologies for the self-advertising, I do encourage you to read the book I mentioned earlier, The Genesis of Technoscientific Revolutions. It provides much more nuance to creativity than what I'll be able to describe here. Creativity is thrilling, but it has a dark side. So one has to manage one's self-expectations around it. To understand what I mean by this, I've drawn 2 diagrams at the bottom. The diagram on the left is a cartoon illustration of knowledge evolution over time, which occurs just like the evolution of biological life by punctuated equilibria. Biological species, for the most part, adapt to their environment as time goes on. That's meant to be conveyed by the thickening of these lines as time advances upwards. But every once in a while, there are sideways breaks where completely new species are created. Knowledge evolution is similar. There is the building on and strengthening of existing knowledge. Again, that's the thickening of these lines as time advances upwards. But again, every once in a while, there are sideways breaks as existing knowledge is overturned, as existing knowledge is surprised. I would say this is the single most difficult notion for even working scientific and engineering researchers to get, that there's nothing wrong with building on and strengthening existing knowledge. But if one is after creative outcome, it is surprise that they must aim for. But surprise to whom? Is it surprise to the individual doing the research? Or is it surprise to common wisdom, to expert peers in the knowledge domain the individual is working in? In scientific and engineering research, of course, it's the latter. Common expert wisdom is ultimately what is cumulative, what society passes on from one generation to the next. So we're talking about surprise to society, not surprise to the individual researcher. But what about the latter? Does surprise to common wisdom imply surprise to the individual? No, it doesn't. To see why not, consider the diagram on the right. Let's say an individual researcher has come up with a possible new nugget of knowledge. The bottom axis is what common wisdom guesses the utility of that potential new nugget of knowledge might be. The left axis is what the individual researcher guesses the utility of the potential new nugget of knowledge might be. On the diagram is depicted 2 possibilities. At one extreme is possibility A, in which common wisdom thinks the utility will be high, as does the researcher. In this possibility, there's not much opportunity for surprise. Even if the researcher is right that this potential nugget of knowledge will be useful, it won't be surprising to common wisdom because common wisdom already thinks it will be useful. At the other extreme is possibility B, in which common wisdom thinks the utility will be low, but the researcher disagrees and thinks it will be high. This is where there is opportunity for surprise. It is precisely when the researcher disagrees with common wisdom that there is opportunity for surprise to common wisdom. In other words, it is when the researcher is a contrarian, and especially an informed contrarian, where there is the most opportunity for surprise and creativity. It's a bit like what Peter Thiel, the high-tech venture capitalist, says: tell me something that's true that almost nobody agrees with. Okay, but herein lies the paradox. Surprise to the community, the essence of creativity, is thrilling. It means you really have done something remarkable in overturning widely held beliefs. But surprise to the community has a dark side. No matter how much experts in the community might say they want you to surprise them, they really don't want you to surprise them. If you seek funding for work that proposes to overturn the community's common wisdom, the community will naturally give you poor reviews, and you are likely to have a difficult time getting funding. And if you are able to get funding and now have found that the community's common wisdom indeed needs to be overturned, the community will typically reject your finding. So you must be prepared for rejection all along the way, and you must manage your expectations around creativity. That said, this is how one might hope to contribute major leaps in knowledge. Over the course of my career, the knowledge advances that I have been proudest of were all rejected at first, and often had to begin as unfunded weekend and evening work. But I don't regret at all that extra work, and would absolutely do it all again, perhaps even more so if given the chance. With that, thank you for your attention. I probably took a little longer than I or you expected. And Helen and University of Science and Technology, thank you again for this opportunity.